UFC Qatar ends a 9-week stretch of UFC cards, and this is a really strong fight night to kind of close us out here. I'm going to be going through my full card predictions, main card and the prelims, picking a winner, and then letting you guys know how I think they get it done. Timestamps are going to be in the description if you guys want to jump around to specific fights. But let's just dive right into the prelims, and we're going to start off with a heavyweight matchup between two debuting fighters. We have Marek, I guess this is Bujlo, and then Denzel Freeman. And when I kind of saw this fight and I looked at the records, neither guy has a ton of experience. I kind of expected this to be like a super low-level heavyweight fight. But I actually think both of these guys could actually be like decent UFC heavyweights. I don't know what the ceiling is, but like I could see these guys eventually breaking into the rankings. It's not a super high bar, but I do think this fight could be interesting. So starting off with Marek here, he has a 6-0 record, 3 wins by knockout, 3 by submission. He's a very grappling heavy style. Like all 3 of those knockouts are from ground and pound finishes. He's in pretty solid shape for a heavyweight, 6'4" with a 78-inch reach. He really has not been tested going later in fights though. His longest fight was 1 minute and 42 seconds. So if Freeman can survive like that early, grappling push, we might see Marek start to fade later on. On the other side here with Freeman, he has a 6-1 record, 4 wins by knockout, 1 by submission. He's the current LFA heavyweight champion, and he's a pretty solid athlete for heavyweight, pretty well-rounded skill set. He's a strong wrestler. On the feet, he's got a couple of head kick KOs, which is something you don't see a ton of in the heavyweight weight class, like especially just on the regional scene. And then we have seen him kind of go into some of the later rounds. He has a decision win, has a decent gas tank. Like we've seen him finish a fight in round 2 where he's having a lot of output and ending up finding the finish. So I'm going to lean towards Freeman here. I think he has the grappling to deal with, Marek's attack, but I think on the feet, Freeman is going to be the better striker. If the fight goes into round 2, I also just think Freeman is going to have the edge there. So I'm going to go with Denzel Freeman, round 2 knockout. I think he weathers that early storm, and then I think he beats a fading Bujlo here in the second round. Then moving down to welterweight, we have Saygid, Izagakhmaev. I mean, this card's got some tough names. That's my best guess there. Going up against Nicolas Dalby. And this is pretty tough matchmaking for Dalby, coming off of back-to-back losses. This is Saygid's UFC debut. He has a 22-2 pro record. He went 3-0 in one championship, but his last fight was over 3 years ago, around 1 KO against Shinya Aoki. It seems like he was one of these one guys that kind of got locked into these contracts where they couldn't fight elsewhere, but then one wasn't putting on a ton of cards. I know we had RDR talk about that. So I think that's what happened here with Saygid. But he's super dangerous. 4 wins by knockout, 12 by submission. Very impressive grappler. And then for Nicolas Dalby, he's a fun fighter. He's always going to push for a dogfight. He fights at a very high pace. Someone who typically pulls away like in the second half of round 2 into round 3. But we have seen throughout his UFC career, doesn't have a ton of finishing upside. He does rely on his durability. And then at like 40 years old, coming off his first knockout loss, I'm just not sure how in I am on like that path to victory, like that win condition. Doesn't feel great. Aging fighter, relying on the cardio and the durability. I don't know if it's still going to be there. And then also his takedown defense has been pretty rough, down at 58%. Rinat Fakhretdinov took him down 5 times. Bonfim took him down 3 times. Claudio Silva 4 times. So in this matchup against Saygid, who is a very good grappler, I think that's going to come back to bite him. I'm going to go with Saygid, round 2 submission win. Then at lightweight, we've got Nurullo Aliev taking on Sham. This is grappler versus grappler here. Aliev, definitely more of like a control-heavy grappler. Not a huge submission threat, but he's 2-0 in the UFC. In those 2 decision wins, he's racked up 19 minutes of control time. Don't think he has a ton of finishing upside on the ground, by submission or by knockout. But he's still very young. He's 24 years old. Only actually finished 2 of his 10 pro fights, which is just like a really low finishing rate. And then, like I mentioned, 0 by sub. Like so far, he hasn't been super entertaining. It's been a lot of just like sit on the top, land a few shots, and just kind of bank rounds that way. Hopefully, as he gets older, continues to develop, maybe he, mixes in some more ground and pound or actually starts to threaten some submissions. On the other side with Shamrock, he is 12-1-1, went 4-0-1 in Octagon, which is a super solid promotion. And then he has finished 11 of his 12 wins. 9 of those have come by submission. So you kind of have these two grapplers with different styles. You have Aliev, who's more of like that control-heavy grappler. You have Shamrock, who's more of the submission threat. I am going to lean towards Aliev in this matchup. I just feel like he's going to get the fight to the ground. I think if he can defend some of the early submissions from Shamrock, we could see him ride out another decision win. I don't know if it's going to be super fan-friendly. I think like the fight would probably be more entertaining if Shamrock won, but just don't know if it's going to happen. So Aliev by decision is going to be my pick. Then moving up to middleweight, we have Ryan Loder taking on Ismail Naurdiev. For Loder, he is 7-2 as a pro, 1-1 in the UFC. Very capable grappler. That is definitely his strong suit. He's going to come in here. He's going to look to wrestle, land his solid ground and pound. 5 of his 7 wins have come by knockout. Had a really impressive win in the tough finale against Robert Valentin. Now, that win hasn't aged super well. Valentin's looked pretty rough, but he outlanded him 42-1. Showed off some solid submission defense. Valentin, threw some stuff out there. Loder was able to defend and then just really dominate him on the ground. On the feet, Loder's not great. Like, he is pretty explosive. He's going to rip these body kicks, southpaw striker, but he's very hittable. He's not super clean, doesn't manage distance super well. And then you can see his style kind of start to devolve if he's not having a ton of success. He's definitely a much better hammer than a nail. We saw then his last fight, round 1 KO loss against Almakhan. Once he started getting touched up on the feet, couldn't land the takedown. It was not looking great for him. On the other side with Naurdiev, he has a 3-3 UFC record that's split across 2 different stints. All 6 of those fights have gone to decision. Kind of interesting because like outside the UFC, he has been a finisher, 12 knockouts, 6 submission wins, and that's not super surprising, right? Going against lower level comp, typically you're going to have, a better chance of getting them out of there. But it's not like he's had this crazy durability outside the UFC, but within the UFC, we have not seen an opponent finish him yet. He is outlanding his UFC opponents by nearly 2 significant strikes per minute. On the feet, he's got some really solid kicks. Can go to the wrestling if he wants to, 40% takedown accuracy. Don't think he does it in this fight. He also has some questionable takedown defense, 73%, but in his 3 UFC losses, that's been the big problem. He's been taken down 8 times in those 3 Ls. To be totally honest with you guys, I don't really trust either of these dudes. I think we're going to know pretty early on who's going to win this fight. I think if Loder comes out and is able to get his grappling going, his wrestling going right away, I think he'll really be able to take control of the fight, potentially find a finish. If he struggles to get that initial takedown, I think Naurdiev will just kind of build from there. I'm leaning towards Naurdiev. I do think he has some danger factor on the feet. Loder, I just don't think he likes to get hit. If Naurdiev can just stuff a couple of takedowns, I think we could start to see him pull away. So I'm going to go with Naurdiev round 2 KO. But like I said, tough to fully buy in on either of these dudes. Then potentially one of the most interesting fights on this card. Super excited for this matchup. We have Bekzat Almakhan taking on Aleksandre Topuria. Kind of interesting matchmaking here. 2 guys that I think are really strong prospects. You could have had them kind of build themselves up in the UFC against some veterans. UFC opts to make like the prospect versus prospect fight. And starting off with Almakhan, 12-2 as a pro, 10 wins by knockout, 1 win by submission. Had his debut against Umar Nurmagomedov, didn't go his way, but then picked up his first UFC win, round 1 KO against Brad Katona. He's a super dangerous striker. He actually dropped Umar Nurmagomedov like super early on in that fight, then just got like control wrestled. So he does hit hard, powerful hands, also has some really strong kicks, just a really impressive striker. And then for Topuria, he had a pretty solid UFC debut. Striking-wise, like his style is pretty similar to Ilya. He really gets into his legs, has that wide base, lots of head movement, really clean boxing. I think where he differs from Ilya is he is a little bit more kick-heavy, throws a lot of spinning attacks. Also, at least in his debut, he was more willing to wrestle than we've seen Ilya do early on, although Ilya was also more wrestling heavy early on in his UFC career. In his debut, he fought a pretty safe and passive fight We'll see if he starts to open up a little bit more, kind of extend his combinations as he gets more and more comfortable. But I'm also not sure if that's the fight he does it here against Almakhan, because this is a very legit opponent. This is not like, a nice step up fight for Topuria to just kind of get a second win. I think both of these guys have a lot of unanswered questions. I'm slightly leaning towards Topuria. I like his upside to grapple and potentially rack up some control time. I think both these guys are super dangerous on the feet, but I think Topuria can kind of separate himself in the grappling. So I'm going to go with Topuria by decision. Not super confident in that pick, but I think these guys are both interesting fighters with some, pretty solid futures. Then moving down one weight class, another really fun fight. I think you can make a case that both of these matchups should be on the main card, but especially this one here. Kyoji Horiguchi making his return to the UFC, taking on Tagir Ulanbekov. Horiguchi left the UFC in 2016. When he left, he was 7-1 in the promotion, with his only loss coming to Demetrius Johnson. So had a ton of success, left to go to Rizin, also fought in Bellator, and since his departure, he has gone 16-3. He won the Bellator bantamweight title. He won a Rizin Grand Prix. He also won titles in Rizin at 125 and 135, so had a ton of success outside the UFC. And then of his 3 losses, he avenged 2 of those to Kaya Sakura and Sergio Pettis. I believe the only loss he did not avenge was against Patchy Mix, but that's up at 135 against a pretty big bantamweight also. So, and also just never got the shot to fight him again after that first loss. Horiguchi is super well-rounded. I'd say he's more of a striker, but also very capable in the grappling department. He's a super explosive athlete. Even at 35, the athleticism is still there. He's got some power in his hands, also a very good kicker. He's kind of undersized, even at flyweight, 5'5", 66-inch reach. I think it's also impressive that he had that success, outside the UFC at 135, right? Both in Rizin and Bellator. And Bellator has had a really strong bantamweight division, right? You've got Magomed Magomedov in there, Sergio Pettis, you had Patchy Mix. I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple of dudes, but one of the strongest weight classes, Rafian Stotts, potentially the strongest weight class outside of the UFC. So the level of competition was still there. On the other side with Ulanbekov, he is a very large frame for flyweight. He's listed at 5'7". The dude is not 5'7". You look at him next to Khabib, Islam Makhachev. He's definitely skinnier than those dudes, but he's maybe an inch or 2 shorter than Islam height-wise. He looks pretty similar to Khabib. So I don't know who's listing him at 5'7", but I'd be shocked if that was actually the case. He's 6-1 in the UFC on a 4-fight win streak. Very dangerous grappler. Averages nearly 3 takedowns per 15 minutes. Did really struggle in the grappling in his last fight against Azat Maxim. Actually was shut out in the takedowns, 0 for 8. In his career, he has 8 wins by submission, 8 by decision, only 1 by KO. I think this is an interesting fight. I've kind of gone back and forth on who I'm going to pick here. I think skill for skill, Horiguchi is the better fighter. I think he's more well-rounded. I think if he can stay on the feet, I think he's definitely going to cruise to a win. But I also just feel like Ulanbekov has the physicality advantage. I could see this kind of being a frustrating fight where Horiguchi looks good on the feet, but then he just ends up getting controlled on the ground for large portions of this fight. I'm going to lean towards Horiguchi, and I can see myself regretting this pick because I have kind of gotten high on some of these dudes coming into the UFC, some of the bigger names outside of the promotion. I know Horiguchi's fought here before, but I've picked a lot of these dudes coming into the UFC, making their first fight or their return, and it hasn't gone super well for a lot of these dudes. But I'm going to back Horiguchi. I'm going to pick him by decision. I'm going to say he does a good enough job defending the takedowns. Maybe he gets controlled for a little bit, but I think he's going to be able to do enough work on the feet to get the decision win here. Now, going up to light heavyweight, we have AbdulRakhman Yakhyaev taking on Raffael Cerqueira. For Yakhyaev here, he is 7-0, 3 wins by knockout, 3 by submission. Had a really impressive knockout on the Contender Series, only took 30 seconds. This dude's a fun prospect. He's only 24 years old. He's aggressive, well-rounded, good striker, good grappler. And this is kind of a setup fight here against Cerqueira. He's 0-3 in the UFC. He's been knocked out in round 1 in 2 of those losses. The other one was just a clear decision L, 30-27 on 2 scorecards, 30-26 on the third. So he's been outstruck and outgrappled in his 3 fights. Pre-UFC, he was a dangerous finisher, like finished 10 of his 11 wins, 8 by knockout. We just haven't seen that in the UFC, and I don't think we see it in this matchup. I'm going Yakhyaev, round 1 KO. Get another interesting debutant here, Luke Riley taking on Bogdan Grad down at 145. Luke Riley's got a lot of hype coming into this fight out of Cage Warriors, 11-0, 8 wins by knockout. He's a really fun striker, clean boxing, works the body really well. He's impressive if he gets into the clinch, especially if he has you hurt, nasty knees, nice elbows. We did see in his last fight, he did win the fight in round 2, but round 1 did get taken down a couple of times, kind of controlled in that round. So something to kind of keep in mind, especially, getting into the UFC, some tougher levels of competition. Can he defend the grappling against some of these dudes? On the other side with Bogdan Grad, he is 15-3 as a pro, 1-1 in the UFC, coming off a pretty underwhelming performance against Muhammad Naimov. It's not like he got completely dominated or anything. It just wasn't a super inspiring fight from either of these dudes. Outside the UFC, and even in his UFC debut, he has been a finisher, 15 wins, 9 by KO, 3 by submission. I think he's more dangerous on the feet, but he's certainly not a bad grappler. In his debut, landed 3 takedowns, had a ground and pound finish. On the Contender Series in his win, he landed 3 takedowns, also has a pretty solid guillotine, 2 wins, or 2 of those 3 submission wins are by the gilly. In this matchup, I think Grad's going to come in. He should push a pretty grappling heavy pace. I don't think he should want to just stand at range and strike with Luke Riley. I think that would be a mistake. I think Luke Riley is just the much more dangerous fighter. I think on the feet, he definitely has more finishing upside. So I'm going to lean towards Luke Riley in this matchup. I don't think Grad is like a dominant enough wrestler where he's just going to be able to ragdoll Luke Riley and, control him for the full 15. I think Riley finds that shot on the feet. He racks up a lot of volume, is pretty active. Like I said, mixes up the levels, works the body, also has power up top. So I'm going to go with Luke Riley around 2 KO. I think he has a nice debut win here in the UFC. I believe this next fight is the start of the main card. At flyweight, we have Alex Perez taking on Asu Almabayev. And to be totally honest, I just have no clue how to evaluate Alex Perez's current form. He started off 6-1 in the UFC, looked like a legit contender in the weight class. And then in the last 5 years, he has gone 1-4. From 2021 to 2023, he fought 1 single time and had 9 total fight cancellations. Then in 2024, just out of nowhere, he becomes super active, fights 3 times, has a competitive decision loss to Muhammad Mokaev, where he did lose, but Mokaev is legit. Perez looked fine in that matchup. Then he KO'd Mateusz Nicolas, looked really good. And then he had a matchup against Tetsuro Taira, and he ended up blowing out his knee, which, not only was a loss, but it kind of ended this nice stretch he had of actually being able to get into the octagon healthy. And then you just look at the dudes he's losing to. He is losing to nothing but the best of the best. He has L's to Davison Figueiredo, Alexandre Pantoja, Joseph Benavidez was that one dude he lost to in his first 7 fights. And then most recently, Muhammad Mokaev, Tetsuro Taira, 2 of the best young prospects in this weight class. So he's losing to just champs, the ultimate top contender in Benavidez, and then these young studs in Mokaev and Taira. He's got a lot of finishing upside, especially for a flyweight. 5 of his 7 UFC wins have come by finish, 3 knockouts, 2 submission wins. He has 6 pro knockouts, 7 subs. So he's got some power in his hands, nice leg kicks. Also just a dangerous, very efficient grappler. On the other side with Almabayev, he has a 5-1 UFC record. He is a high volume wrestler, averages over 4.5 takedowns per 15 minutes. Lands those takedowns at a 43% clip. The issue with Almabayev is he doesn't have a ton of finishing upside, especially against legit competition, and then he just doesn't do a ton of work when he actually gets the fight to the ground. He's averaging 2.16 significant strikes per minute, so he doesn't do a lot of work on the feet. Even if he gets you down, it's a lot of control time, not a lot of actually landing anything significant. And so with that kind of style, you do have to just control the vast majority of the rounds, because someone could, kind of get an edge on you on the feet, and there's no guarantee you get that back just by laying on top of them. It's tough to trust Alex Perez, right? He's had a lot of activity issues. He's coming off a knee injury. but he's still only 33 years old. He did look good in those fights in 2024 and like was very close to beating Muhammad Mokaev. Like I said, a super competitive fight. I think Mokaev is a lot better than this version of Asu Almabayev. And I do think Perez has the tools to win this fight. I could certainly see myself, feeling dumb picking Perez here just with, not a ton of activity, the injury, but I'm going to pick the dog here. I'm going to pick Perez by decision. I'm going to hope he's healthy enough going into this fight, and I think he can do enough to stuff the takedowns. I'm not saying he's never going to get taken down. I think he's going to get controlled a little bit, but I think he can do enough work on the feet, and I just don't trust Almabayev to be active enough to actually like create a real margin in this fight. So my pick is going to be Alex Perez by decision. Up next, we have one of these fights where it's like, why is the heavyweight matchup between Serghei Spivak and Shamil Gaziev on the main card over like the Horiguchi fight, even like the Topuria, Almakhan fight? Like, let's get these guys some shine on the main card. Do we really need to see a fight that's probably going to be pretty gross? I think stylistically, this is just a tough matchup between these two. So starting off with Spivak, he has lost 3 of his last 4, but against really strong competition, Waldo Cortez Acosta, Jailton Almeida, and then Cyril Gane. We've seen him kind of struggle against some of the better strikers in this weight class, in Gane and Waldo. And then he also was out grappled by Almeida, but Almeida's kind of just like a physical freak for this weight class. Spivak is still a very capable grappler, really impressive submission win against Marcin Tybura, completely ragdolled Derek Lewis, which was his second to last win. He averages 4.2 takedowns per 15 minutes, lands those takedowns at a very high 62% clip. On the other side with Gaziev, he's a big heavyweight, 6'4", 78.5-inch reach, is going to weigh in pretty close to that heavyweight limit. He's 3-1 in the UFC, 2 wins by knockout. The other win was a very grappling heavy decision. I think he's got some questionable cardio if the fight isn't really going his way. If he can't dictate the pace, I do think we can see him fade later on in fights. And so I'm comparing these two. I probably give Spivak the grappling edge, especially in terms of like actually being able to finish the fight. He's got some pretty impressive jiu-jitsu for a heavyweight. And then like on the feet, maybe I prefer Gaziev. I think this could definitely turn into like a really gross striking battle between these two. I'm going to lean a little bit towards Spivak. I think if he goes out there and actually pushes the grappling, and like we even saw against Jailton Almeida, like he wasn't really shying away from those grappling exchanges. I don't think Gaziev has the footwork to just completely neutralize his grappling like we saw Cyril Gane do. He landed a couple takedowns against Waldo Cortez Acosta. I think if Spivak can at least try to initiate the grappling, I think he can kind of wear on Shamil Gaziev, and maybe he starts to pull away. So I'm going to lean towards Spivak. We have seen when he wins fights, he's typically finishing them either by ground and pound or by submission. I'm going to say Gaziev kind of gasses out in the second or third, and we see Spivak get like a ground and pound finish. I'll go round 3, like ground and pound KO for Spivak. I don't feel great about it. I don't really trust either of these guys, but that will be my pick. In this next matchup, this is just a hilarious fight, hilarious matchmaking between Jack Hermansson and Miktabek Oralbai. This is a middleweight moving down to welterweight and then a lightweight moving up to 155 in the same fight. I can't remember another instance of this happening. If you guys can think of one, let me know. I'd love to hear it. But I do think this is a smart move for potentially both of them, especially for Jack Hermansson. He has just been physically outmatched at 185. He's got some impressive jiu-jitsu, but he has struggled to land the takedowns. Also on the feet, just hasn't shown a ton of power, 0 UFC knockdowns. He has shown solid output, 5.1 significant strikes per minute. He's decent defensively, like he doesn't get hit at a super high clip, but his durability just isn't great. Like he's been knocked out in 4 of his 9 losses. On the other side with Oralbai, he is 14-2-1 as a pro, 3-1 in the UFC. He has had a crazy tough strength of schedule. He debuts up at 170 against Uros Medic, who's proven to be super dangerous, especially as of late. Then he gets booked against Elvis Brenner, wins that fight. Then he gets booked against Mateusz Rambeski, who was always in wars. And then his most recent fight, Tofik Musayev, debuting in the UFC, coming in from Bellator, another really, really tough matchup. And like going 3-1 against those names is very impressive, especially like he's still fairly young in his career. He's well-rounded, 6 wins by knockout, 6 by submission, 2 decision wins. He's got a lot of powerful straight shots on the feet, really strong wrestling, 5.8 takedowns per 15 minutes. And then he's just proven to be very tough, very durable. He's tough to get out of there. We saw that especially in the Mateusz Rombeski fight. Typically, when you're looking at a fight and you've got one of the two like moving up in weight or moving down, you at least have a decent idea. You can somewhat picture what the fight is going to look like. I have a really tough time picturing this matchup with the dude coming down from middleweight, a dude moving up from lightweight. Like, is the size difference going to look crazy? Like, Oralbai's been a big lightweight. Hermansson's been a smaller middleweight. It's just very odd. I'm just going to pick the dude that I think is a better fighter, and I think Miktobek Oralbai is just better. Maybe him moving up to 170, he's going to look fuller. Maybe the weight cut won't be as draining for him. I mean, it definitely won't be as draining for him. So I'm going to lean towards Oralbai here. I don't know if he comes in here and just like completely dismantles Jack Hermansson. Like, Hermansson's solid. I don't know if he just nukes him early on. I'm going to pick Oralbai to win a decision, but I'm just really interested in seeing how both these guys look in their new weight classes, or at least for this fight in their new weight classes. Then I believe this is the third to last fight. Volkan Ozdemir taking on Alonzo Menefield at light heavyweight. Ozdemir has been out for, I think, like just over a year. 8-7 pro record, 8-7 UFC record, which doesn't sound great, but like pretty much every fight has been against a legit opponent. You just look at his losses, right? Pretty much the best of the best. Daniel Cormier, Anthony Smith, Dominic Reyes, Yuri Prohashka, Magomed Ankalaev, Nikita Krylov, and Carlos Ulberg. Those are his losses. He's a dangerous striker. He's got knockouts in 5 of his 8 UFC wins. He's proven to be pretty durable. Like, his last 3 losses are against guys who are dangerous finishers: Carlos Ulberg, Nikita Krylov, Magomed Ankalaev. And so, he's losing those fights to legit opponents, but he's also not getting finished in those matchups. On the other side with Menefield, he is coming off a decision win against Umar Sy, a fight where he was a massive underdog, a plus 500. Maybe this is unfair, but I feel like the takeaway from that fight wasn't like, oh wow, like Menefield looked amazing. It was more of like, man, Umar Sy just didn't look like the guy that I think a lot of people thought he was going into that fight. So maybe that's unfair, but I don't think we saw a new side of Menefield that we hadn't seen before. He's explosive, he's powerful, he's a good athlete, but he's also aging, 38 years old. When you are relying on that explosiveness, that can start to fade as you get older. He's got 17 pro wins, 9 by knockout, 4 by submission. We have seen him kind of hit a wall when he started to go up against that top tier competition. He's got KO losses to both Carlos Ulberg and Azamat Murzakanov. I just think Ozdemir's better here. I think he's the better striker. I think he's more dangerous. I think he's a little bit less hittable. So I'm going to go with Volkan Ozdemir, round 2 KO. He's not someone who fights at a super high pace. He doesn't really force the issue. We've seen Menefield kind of be hit or miss in terms of his aggressiveness. Sometimes he comes out super hot. Other times he's a little bit more patient. I think Volkan ends up finding the knockout. I think he gets it done in the second. Then we have arrived at the co-main event, and welterweight is just on fire right now. Islam Makhachev, new champion. You have Carlos Prates, Michael Morales, both kind of angling for title shots after their big wins at UFC 322. And in my opinion, the title shot should still be going to Ian Machado Gary if he can pull out a win here, especially if he gets it done in impressive fashion. Bilal Muhammad taking on Ian Gary here. Bilal Muhammad is coming off his first loss in his last 12 fights against JDM. JDM broke that 11-fight unbeaten streak. Bilal has really strong cardio. He's a very good wrestler. Landed 5+ takedowns against Leon, Luque, and Wonderboy. I think he is underrated striking. He's not an amazing striker, but the striking is good enough to complement his grappling. He beat Gilbert Burns and Sean Brady on the feet. Didn't land a takedown against either of those dudes. Some decent pressure boxing. I do think in his last fight, the game plan was questionable. It was a lot of standing on the feet against JDM. I think it's also tough to not look at that fight and look at how Bilal was not able to land the takedowns and rack up control time. And then you look at how effortlessly Islam Makhachev made it look. And Islam might just be, he is an all-time great, right? I think you could make a case for clean fighters if you're forgetting about that early weird positive test heart medication thing. Islam's probably a top 3 fighter of all time. Maybe at worst top 4, top 5. But man, Bilal just really struggled in that JDM fight. He was too willing to strike, and it was just not a great performance. And then for a guy like Bilal, he does lack that finishing upside where he doesn't have a ton of power on the feet, and then also just doesn't have a ton of submission threat if he does get the fight to the ground. On the other side with Ian Gary, I think he is one of the most underrated fighters in the UFC, also one of the most overhated. I think people take things like that they just dislike about him and kind of connect it to his fighting ability, and that's just not the case. Like, the dude is incredibly legit. He's got a big frame for welterweight, 6'3", 74.5-inch reach. He's a very clean striker, great kicks, has really strong distance management, very good counter striker. And I think his grappling is also slept on, like both offensively and defensively. We've seen him in fights where he's not too proud to go to the grappling against a Carlos Prates, a Michael Venom Page. And then like defensively, Shavkat went 2 for 10 on takedowns. Shavkat was able to rack up some control time, spend some time in the clinch, but Ian Gary also threatened Shavkat on the ground, nearly locked in that rear naked choke. And I think it was the last round, which was almost a crazy moment against Shavkat. So Ian Gary is just really impressive. I think also, I know it's MMA math, but you just look at that fight against Carlos Prates. You look at what Prates just did to Ian Gary, and now everyone's pitching Prates to fight for the title. I know the fight didn't, go great at the end for Ian Gary, but he still had Prates pretty much shut out the first 3 rounds. Prates looked very lost on the feet. It was just a great performance from Ian Gary. He's a great fighter. And I think you just look at these two guys' kind of trajectories here. Ian Gary's going up. Bilal's probably going down. I just think Ian Gary's going to land enough on the feet where even if he's getting clinched, maybe controlled for a little bit by Bilal, I think he's going to be able to win rounds. I don't know if he finds the finish. Bilal's been super durable. He took some big shots from JDM, didn't get finished, and maybe he needs that finish to stamp the title shot. But I'm going to pick Ian Gary here, and I think he ends up getting it done by decision. And then the final matchup here, the main event between Arman Tsarukyan and Dan Hooker. In my opinion, if Arman wins this fight, I don't care how he gets it done, knockout, submission, split decision, DQ. If Arman Tsarukyan wins this fight, he should be fighting for the title. Of all the dudes who are kind of in the mix at 155, I think Arman is already the most deserving. I know he had the weird thing where he had to pull out with the injury. Some people thought he was going to miss weight against Islam. But you've got guys like Justin Gaethje, Paddy Pimblett, who are far less deserving, and they're both just sitting on their spots. If Arman wins this fight, he should be next for Ilia Topuria. He's going up against Dan Hooker, obviously. And this does just feel like a pretty tough matchup for Dan Hooker. Arman just checks a lot of the boxes you want in a great MMA fighter. He's an impressive grappler, 3.25 takedowns per 15 minutes. He's got great control on the ground, some really nasty ground and pound when he does get it there. Pretty much a 0 in terms of a submission threat. He hasn't even attempted a submission in the UFC, but it hasn't really mattered. He's also a very capable striker, has some power on the feet, also very durable, and I think he should be 10-1 in the UFC. The Gamrot fight, close. I thought Arman won that fight. I think his only loss should be that debut against Islam Makhachev. On the other side with Dan Hooker, you never want to count him out. He's an absolute dog. He's got a big frame for this weight class, 6 feet tall, 75.5-inch reach, uses those long weapons pretty well, the teeps, the jabs, the straight shots. He's a high-volume striker, 5 significant strikes per minute, but he's also pretty hittable, 4.72 significant strikes absorbed per minute. We have seen him kind of struggle against some of the more explosive fighters, guys like Michael Chandler, Edson Barbosa, Arnold Allen. The takedown defense, statistically is solid, 78%, but we did see him get taken down 5 times against Mateusz Gamrot. He did do a decent job getting back to his feet. I just think if he does get taken down in those spots, I think Arman has a better chance of actually controlling him there. Gamrot, not necessarily known for his control grappling. So I'm going to lean towards Arman here. Like I said, I just think it's tough. Arman's capable on the feet. I don't think he gets blown away in that department. He has way more grappling upside in this fight where he can bank rounds that way. And then Dan Hooker also doesn't have that one-shot power. Yeah, he could land a head kick or a big knee or something like that, but it's not something you see him do consistently in his wins. He's getting into these pretty close competitive dogfights, and I just think Arman's going to be able to do enough to bank the rounds here. So I'm going to go with Arman Tsarukyan. I could see him winning by decision. I could see him winning by knockout. Probably not by submission, but I'm going to pick him by decision. I could also see a championship round, potential TKO, but I'll go Arman by decision. That'll be my final pick, and that is going to wrap it up for this card. Pretty excited for this one. Some fun matchups, especially on the prelims. main event that could have some title implications. And I talked about Arman Tsarukyan, who should be getting the title shot if he wins this fight. I'll even say if Dan Hooker wins this fight, he should be jumping the line ahead of Justin Gaethje, ahead of Paddy Pimblett. That might be a hot take. Dan Hooker beating Arman Tsarukyan is a much more impressive win than any recent win that Justin Gaethje or Paddy Pimblett have on their resume. So high stakes also for Dan Hooker. Is the UFC going to follow that? Probably not. Arman Tsarukyan could knock out Hooker in round 1, and they'll probably still give the title shot to like Paddy Pimblett or Justin Gaethje. But that is my take on this matchup. Should be high stakes. Thank you all for stopping by. Drop your picks down below, and I will see you all in the next one.